Across the scorched Arizona territory, the merciless summer sun claims many victims. Etu Morning-Star, Apache tracker of legendary skill, stumbles through a barren wash, disoriented after weeks alone. The flash flood that erased his trail left him with nothing but determination to find his way home. That's when he sees her, a white woman, her fingers bleeding as she harvests bright red cactus fruit, seemingly oblivious to the thorns piercing her skin. Curious, he follows at a distance until she reaches a small alcove in the canyon wall. There, tiny stone mounds await her offerings, children's graves adorned with crimson fruit instead of flowers. Her quiet sobs echo against ancient rock as she whispers names to the desert wind. What terrible tragedy could unite these two strangers from worlds torn apart by hatred and mistrust? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The medicine pouch hanging from Etu Morning-Star's neck had grown lighter with each passing day. Once filled with sacred herbs, pemmican, and small totems of protection, it now held only a flint striker, a single eagle feather, and memories of a life that seemed increasingly distant. He ran his calloused fingers over the worn leather, seeking comfort in its familiar texture as he rested in the shadow of a towering saguaro. 3 weeks earlier, Etu had been leading a hunting party from his band when the sky darkened without warning. The elders had taught him to read the desert's moods since childhood, but this storm had defied all patterns. Within moments, a wall of water had crashed through the narrow canyon, separating him from the others and washing away every familiar landmark. "Grandfather Sky, guide my path," he whispered, his voice cracked from thirst. Before the flood, Etu's reputation as a tracker had been unmatched among the people. Even the most respected elders sought his counsel when interpreting signs of game or enemy movement. His father had taught him to read the land as others read the stars, finding meaning in bent grass, displaced pebbles, and the subtle patterns of animal droppings. These skills had sustained his band through drought and conflict, earning him not just respect but genuine affection from his people. Now those same skills had failed him. The flood had transformed the landscape, erasing trails and altering the flow of seasonal streams. What little water remained was claimed by the cavalry outpost and white settlers who had been encroaching on Apache lands with increasing boldness. Etu adjusted the rawhide binding on his moccasin and rose painfully to his feet. The mountains to the north offered his best hope from their heights. He might recognize enough of the terrain to find his way back to his people. As he gathered his meager belongings, a sharp pang of hunger reminded him of his dwindling strength. The cactus fruits that sustained him these past days were becoming scarce, their bright red flesh a rare splash of color in the dusty landscape. Each one he consumed came with the price of thorns in his fingers, a small suffering that connected him to the larger pain of separation from his tribe. His people would be searching for him, but they would also be moving to summer hunting grounds. With each passing day, the distance between them likely grew. Worse, this was bluecoat territory now. The soldiers from the outpost regularly patrolled these arroyos, and they were not known for asking questions before firing their rifles. As the afternoon heat began to wane, Etu continued his journey, following the dry wash that cut through the red rock formations. Each step raised a small cloud of dust that clung to his sweat-dampened skin. The terrain was becoming increasingly unfamiliar. These were lands his band had avoided since the establishment of Fort Defiance 2 winters ago. The Apache way taught respect for death. When a person's spirit departed, their dwelling was burned, their name rarely spoken, their possessions distributed or destroyed. This allowed the spirit to journey onward without earthly attachments. As the sun began its descent, painting the canyon walls in shades of amber and gold, Etu wondered if his people had already performed such rituals for him, concluding he had crossed into the spirit world. The thought brought no fear, only a profound sadness. He had no wife, no children to carry his bloodline, only his reputation as a tracker and his place within the tribe. If he died here, alone in this wash, what would remain of Etu Morning-Star? This somber reflection was interrupted by movement in the distance, a flash of pale fabric against red rock. Instinctively, Etu pressed himself against the canyon wall, becoming one with the shadows. Peering cautiously around a boulder, he watched as a white woman moved purposefully among the prickly pear cacti that dotted the slope of the arroyo. His first thought was to retreat. White women meant white men nearby, likely with guns, but something about her movements held his attention. She was alone, her dress faded and patched, her hair bound simply at the nape of her neck, and she was gathering cactus fruit not with a knife or cloth to protect her hands, but with bare fingers that left small smears of blood on her skirt as she worked. Eleanor Ward kept a daguerreotype in the pocket of her faded calico dress. Once pristine in its small brass frame, the photograph now bore water stains that blurred the edges of the formal family portrait. Her husband Richard stood stiffly in his captain's uniform, one hand resting on her shoulder as she sat with perfect posture, 3-year-old Thomas on her lap, and 5-year-old Sarah and 7-year-old William standing at attention beside her chair. The photographer had required them to remain motionless for nearly a minute. Eleanor remembered how she'd whispered stories to keep the children still, promises of candy if they could play statue until the man removed the lens cap. Their faces appeared solemn in the image, but moments after it was taken, they had erupted in laughter and movement, William turning cartwheels across the fort's parade ground, while Sarah chased him, their Eastern propriety momentarily forgotten. Now the image was all that remained of them, the last evidence that Sarah's eyes had crinkled when she smiled, that William had a cowlick that resisted every attempt at proper grooming, that Thomas had possessed a dimple in his left cheek exactly like his father's. Not quite all, Eleanor whispered to herself as she carefully placed another crimson fruit atop the smallest of the stone cairns. The desert had taken her children one by one, their small bodies succumbing to fever after the spring that supplied their homestead had been diverted to the fort's expanding needs. The cactus fruit was the only offering she could Provedino flowers would grow in this harsh landscape, and she had long since run out of the candies they had loved. The irony was not lost on her. Richard had authorized the water diversion himself, convinced by his superiors that the needs of the growing military presence outweighed those of scattered homesteaders, and certainly those of the Apache bands who had used the spring for generations. He had been a man devoted to duty, to order, to the inexorable march of progress that was taming the West. "Water is civilization, Ellie," he had explained when she questioned the decision. "Without it, there can be no permanence, no security, no future." Then the fevers had come, and with the nearest doctor 3 days' ride away, Eleanor had watched helplessly as her future withered before her eyes. William first, his strong body fighting for 5 terrible days. Then gentle Sarah, slipping away in her sleep just when Eleanor thought the worst had passed. Finally, baby Thomas, his small hand growing cold in hers as dawn broke over the mountains. Richard had changed after that, questioning orders, challenging his commanding officer. When the flash flood came, he had been scouting alternative water sources, a mission not sanctioned by his superiors. His body was never recovered. Eleanor remained at their homestead rather than returning to the fort. The small cabin Richard had built stood empty now as she spent her days tending the graves, gathering enough food to sustain herself, and waiting. For what? She could not say. Some of the women from the fort had visited initially, bringing food and offers to escort her back east to her family in Boston. Eleanor had declined with the automatic politeness ingrained since childhood. How could she explain that she could no more leave her children's graves than she could stop breathing? Over time, the visits had ceased. Rumors reached her that the new commanding officer, Major Hargrove, had declared the area unsafe due to increased Apache activity. In truth, she had seen no sign of natives until today, the silent, watchful figure who thought himself hidden in the shadows of the arroyo. Eleanor was not afraid. Death had already taken everything she valued. There was nothing more it could threaten her with. If this Apache brave sought her life, so be it. But he had been watching for 3 days now, following at a distance as she gathered the fruit, observing her rituals at the graves, yet never approaching. Today, she decided, that would change. Placing the last fruit on Thomas's cairn, she turned deliberately toward the shadow where the brave concealed himself and spoke directly to him for the first time. "If you're hungry," she called, her voice rough from disuse, There's food at my cabin. It seems foolish to keep pretending we don't see each other. Etu's hand reflexively moved to the knife at his belt. The white woman's direct address startled him more than any ambush. For 3 days, he had convinced himself his tracking skills had kept him invisible to her. Now, her pale eyes fixed on his position with unsettling accuracy. He remained motionless, weighing his options. She appeared unarmed, but experience had taught him that white settlers were rarely without weapons. The cabin she mentioned could harbor others, waiting to capture or kill him. Yet her demeanor suggested otherwise. There was no fear in her stance, no tension in her shoulders that indicated deception. More puzzling still was the offer of food, a precious commodity in this unforgiving landscape. Hunger ultimately made his decision. Stepping from the shadows, Etu kept one hand near his knife as he slowly approached. The woman did not retreat. Up close, he could see the exhaustion etched into her face, the hollowness of her cheeks that mirrored his own hunger. "I have no weapons," she said, holding out her hands. Blood from cactus thorns had dried in small rivulets across her palms. "Only food and water to share." Water. The word sent a jolt through Etu's parched body. His own canteen hung nearly empty at his side, the leather shrunken and cracked from the relentless sun. He spoke carefully in the trader's language that sometimes bridged their peoples. "Why offer these things to me? I am Apache, and I am alone," she replied simply. "As are you." The truth of her words hung between them like the heat shimmering above desert stones. She turned and began walking toward a narrow trail leading from the arroyo. After a moment's hesitation, Etu followed, maintaining distance. The path wound through twisted juniper trees before revealing a small cabin nestled against the canyon wall. A lean-to stable stood empty beside it, and a weathered garden plot showed signs of recent tending. It was a modest homestead, the kind Etu had seen established and abandoned countless times as white settlers discovered the harsh realities of desert life. "My husband built this," she said, pausing at the door, "before he died in the same flood that I suspect separated you from your people." Etu's surprise must have shown on his face, for she added, "There are tracks from many Apache along the wash where the flood came through, none since. And you watch the horizon to the north each morning, as one would who seeks his people." This white woman possessed unexpected observational skills. Etu found himself reassessing her as she pushed open the cabin door. Inside was a single room with a packed earth floor. A cast-iron stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed, and a trunk were the only furnishings. Everything was meticulously ordered, yet the space felt hollow, as if the life had been drained from it. She gestured to one of the chairs, then moved to the stove where a pot simmered. The smell of beans and chilies filled the small space, making Etu's stomach clench painfully. She ladled the stew into 2 wooden bowls, placing one before him along with a canteen. "My name is Eleanor Ward," she said, seating herself across from him. "My husband was Captain Richard Ward of Fort Defiance." The name struck Etu like a physical blow. Captain Ward the Bluecoat, who had ordered the spring diverted, whose actions had forced Etu's band to abandon their traditional summer grounds, whose men had fired on Apache women gathering water. This woman was the wife of an enemy. Eleanor saw the recognition and hardening in his eyes. "You know the name," she stated rather than asked. "Then you should also know that he died trying to undo the harm he caused." Before Etu could respond, Eleanor suddenly paled. She rose halfway from her chair, then swayed alarmingly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I haven't been." Her words cut off as she collapsed to the floor. Etu moved instinctively, kneeling beside her. Her skin burned with fever, her breathing shallow and rapid. The signs were unmistakably severe dehydration combined with heat exhaustion, a silent killer in the desert. Etu's people had a saying, "Enemy's blood waters no corn. Vengeance alone brought no sustenance." As he looked at the unconscious woman before him, he saw not the wife of Captain Ward, but a fellow human suffering from the same thirst that plagued his band when the spring was taken. With practiced movements, he lifted Eleanor onto the narrow bed. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her skin hot and dry to the touch. Etu knew the signs: without water, she would not survive the night. He uncorked his own canteen and carefully wet her cracked lips, then dampened a cloth to place on her forehead. The cabin revealed much about her life. Unlike the cluttered dwellings of most white settlers, everything here had purpose. No decorative items graced the walls. No unnecessary comforts softened the sparse furnishings. It was the home of one who had stripped existence to its essence. Beside the bed stood a small wooden chest. Etu hesitated, then opened it, searching for anything that might help the feverish woman. Inside lay folded children's clothing, a small dress, tiny shirts, miniature moccasins crafted in white settler style. Beneath these, wrapped in oilcloth, he discovered a leather portfolio. Unfolding it revealed Captain Ward's military map of the territory. The document was covered with notations in a precise hand, marking water sources, Apache movement patterns, and patrol routes. A red line showed the water diversion from the ancient spring to Fort Defiance, with calculations of flow rates and distribution needs. Most telling was a circle around the arroyo, where Eleanor now tended graves, labeled in the same hand, Ward Homestead not to be disturbed. The date beside this notation came after the water diversion order. Etu studied the map intently. Here was knowledge that could help his people locations of cavalry outposts, patrol schedules, and most importantly, the exact route of the diverted water. With this, the Apache could potentially reclaim their spring. Eleanor stirred on the bed, mumbling incoherently. Etu quickly returned the map to its hiding place and resumed tending to her. As darkness fell, he built a small fire in the stove and continued applying cool cloths to her brow. Her fever seemed to intensify with the night, her delirious whispers becoming more urgent. "The water, Richard," she pleaded to her absent husband. "They need water. The children need water." Sometime near midnight, her eyes fluttered open, focusing on Etu with momentary clarity. "You stayed," she whispered. "You are sick," he replied simply. "The desert does not care whose side we claim." A ghost of a smile touched her lips before she drifted back into fitful sleep. Dawn brought improvement. Eleanor's fever broke with the first light, and she accepted small sips of water from Etu's hands. By mid-morning, she was able to sit up, though weakness still claimed her limbs. "You could have taken the map and gone," she said, watching him prepare a thin porridge from her meager supplies. Etu stilled. "You knew?" "I saw the map in your hands before the fever took me completely." Her voice held no accusation. "It would have been the rational choice. Your people could use that information. And yours would hunt me for it," he countered. "The map stays." Eleanor studied him with those direct eyes that seemed to cut through pretense. "My husband made that map. Did you see his notes? He was planning to restore the water access when he died." Etu placed a bowl of porridge before her. "Eat. Regain your strength. Then we will speak of maps and water and the dead." As she ate, Eleanor gestured to the window where the morning light illuminated the distant graves. They were 7, 5, and 3, William, Sarah, and Thomas. The fever took them within a week of each other after the spring was diverted. Clean water became scarce, and what remained grew stagnant. Etu's people had lost children to disease, to starvation, to cavalry bullets. The grief was the same, regardless of skin color or language. He recognized the hollowness in Eleanor's eyes. It matched what he saw when the elders spoke of children lost to the white man's diseases. "Richard requested reassignment after their deaths," Eleanor continued. "When that was denied, he began documenting the effects of the water diversion not just on homesteaders, but on the Apache bands as well. He believed there was enough water for all, if properly managed." She met Etu's gaze steadily. "The military disagreed, especially Major Hargrove, who replaced my husband as fort commander." Eleanor's strength returned gradually over the next 2 days. Etu remained, telling himself it was only until she could fend for herself again. Yet something deeper kept him there, a growing curiosity about this woman, who defied every expectation he had of white settlers. On the third morning, Eleanor opened the wooden trunk at the foot of her bed and withdrew a folded document bearing an official military seal. She placed it on the table between them, her fingers lingering on the edges as if reluctant to break contact. "This is the water diversion order," she said quietly. "Richard's signature authorized it. He believed he was securing the fort's future, ensuring progress." A bitter smile crossed her face. "Progress that cost us everything." Etu unfolded the document, studying the formal language and the bold signature at the bottom. Captain Richard Ward, 5th Cavalry Regiment. The order detailed the construction of a diversion dam and channel to redirect the spring's flow to Fort Defiance, citing military necessity and the security interests of territorial development. "Your husband took water that had flowed free for generations," Etu said, unable to keep the edge from his voice. "Water that belonged to no man." Yes, Eleanor did not defend or excuse the action. The Apache called it "Tuditwi bitter water spring, did they not?" Etu's surprise must have shown on his face, for she added, "Richard learned your names for the landmarks. Later, after our children died, he came to understand what he had helped destroy." She rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the stark landscape. He was raised to believe in manifest destiny, in the inevitable spread of civilization across the continent. It wasn't until he saw the cost of that belief that he began to question it. Etu joined her at the window. In the distance, heat shimmered above the rocky terrain, creating wavering mirages on the horizon. "My people have watched the white man's progress for many years. It always flows one way, like your husband's diverted spring." Eleanor turned to face him. "That's why I've stayed. Richard died trying to restore balance. I remain to see it finished." "One woman against the United States Army?" Etu could not keep the skepticism from his voice. "One woman with the truth," Eleanor countered, tapping the diversion order, "and documentation of its consequences." Richard gathered testimonies from settlers whose crops failed, recorded deaths from contaminated water sources, mapped the displacement of Apache bands. He built a case for restoring shared access to the spring. Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Etu moved swiftly to the window, peering cautiously through the worn cotton curtains. A dust cloud approached from the direction of Fort Defiance. "Cavalry patrol," he said grimly. "2 riders." Eleanor's face paled. "They rarely come this far out. Something's changed." "I must go," Etu said, gathering his few possessions. "No," Eleanor caught his arm. "They'll be watching the trails. The stable has a hidden space beneath the floorboards. Richard built it to store his documentation away from prying eyes." Etu hesitated, torn between flight and the risk of capture. The patrol would almost certainly spot him if he tried to reach the canyon's protective shadows. "Trust me," Eleanor urged, "as I trusted you with my life." Minutes later, Etu lay in the cramped space beneath the stable floor, listening to the approaching riders. Through cracks in the weathered wood, he could see Eleanor emerge from the cabin, shading her eyes against the sun as the patrol arrived. "Mrs. Ward," a voice called with practiced courtesy, "Major Hargrove sends his compliments and concerns. You've missed the last 2 supply wagons." "I've been unwell," Eleanor replied, her voice carrying clearly to Etu's hiding place. "But I'm recovered now. The Major also wishes to inform you that railroad surveyors will be coming through this area next month. He strongly recommends you consider his offer of escort back to civilization." Etu felt his breath catch. Railroad surveyors meant more water diversion, more displacement, and they would certainly not respect the small gravesite that Eleanor tended so faithfully. "Please thank the Major for his concern," Eleanor responded, her tone carefully neutral. "But this is my home. I have no intention of leaving." "Ma'am, with all due respect, it's not safe out here. There have been Apache sightings, a renegade band, possibly survivors from the flood." "Is that so?" Eleanor's voice revealed nothing. "I've seen no one." After the patrol departed, a tense silence filled the homestead. The news of surveyors coming to chart a railroad route through the canyon cast a shadow over both Etu and Eleanor, though for different reasons. "The graves," Eleanor said that evening as they sat before the small fire. "They'll destroy the graves." Etu nodded, understanding her fear. "And the last water sources my people can access without crossing military territory." Eleanor rose and retrieved a worn leather journal from beneath her pillow. She handled it with reverence, running her fingers over the faded cover before opening it. "I wrote about them every day," she explained, turning pages filled with neat, compact handwriting, "so I wouldn't forget the small things. The way William would save the raisins from his porridge until last, how Sarah hummed to herself when she thought no one was listening, the shape of Thomas's fingernails, perfect tiny seashells. She offered the journal to Etu, an unprecedented gesture of trust. Your people keep their histories through stories, yes? This is my story. Etu accepted the journal carefully. Though he had learned some written English through traders and a missionary who had briefly lived near his band, reading remained difficult. Yet the importance of what Eleanor offered was clear. This was not merely a book, but a mother's heart committed to paper. Among my people, he said, we do not speak the names of the dead. Their spirits must be free to travel to the next world without being called back by those who love them. Eleanor considered this. Is that why you've never told me your name? I gave my name to the wind when I thought I would die in the desert, Etu admitted. But I am called Etu Morning-Star. Etu, she repeated softly. And do your people write nothing down? Some things are carved in stone or painted on canyon walls, he explained. Sacred stories, great battles, the passing of seasons. But the deepest knowledge is carried here. He touched his chest and passed from elder to youth through spoken word. As the night deepened, Eleanor read aloud from her journal stories of her children's lives in this harsh landscape, how William had become an expert at spotting lizards, counting 17 varieties. Sarah's talent for mimicking bird calls, so perfect she could summon quail to the yard. Baby Thomas's delight in the rare desert wildflowers that bloomed briefly after spring rains. Etu listened, recognizing the universal language of a parent's pride and love. Though he had no children of his own, he had helped raise his sister's sons until smallpox took them 3 winters ago. That shared grief formed an unexpected bridge between them. Your husband, Etu asked during a pause in her reading. Did he know his actions would harm the children? Eleanor closed the journal. Richard believed in order, in systems. The fort's water needs were calculated, documented, approved through proper channels. He couldn't see beyond the paperwork to the consequences. Her voice softened. But when he did, when he held William's body, something broke in him. He began to question everything. And this made him enemies at the fort. Major Hargrove especially. He called Richard Indian sympathetic when my husband argued for restoring partial flow to the spring. Eleanor's face hardened. After the children died, Richard didn't care about his reputation. He mapped alternative water sources, documented the harm done by the diversion. He believed there was a solution that could serve everyone's needs. Etu thought of the meticulous maps he had seen. The flood that took him, was he searching for water when it came? Eleanor nodded. He was investigating an aquifer to the north that might supply the fort without draining the spring. She met Etu's gaze directly. The same flash flood that separated you from your people. The connection hung between them 2 lives altered by the same moment of nature's fury. Etu wondered if Richard Ward had seen the wall of water coming, if he had fought against it as Etu had, clinging to rocks and branches as the world dissolved into churning chaos. My people may believe your husband's spirit caused the flood as retribution, Etu said carefully. And what do you believe? Eleanor asked. Etu looked into the fire, watching the flames dance. I believe water finds its true path, regardless of what men build to contain it. Dawn brought clarity and purpose. The railroad surveyors would arrive within weeks, and neither Etu nor Eleanor could stop them alone. After a night of consideration, Etu reached a decision. My people must know of this threat, he said, as they shared a sparse breakfast. And of the documents your husband gathered. This knowledge could protect both the Apache and the spring. Eleanor studied him across the table. You're leaving then? We are leaving, Etu corrected. The soldiers will return. It is not safe for you here alone. Surprise flickered across Eleanor's face. You would take me to your tribe, a white woman, the widow of Captain Ward? My people respect courage and honor the bonds of water and blood. You have shown both. Etu withdrew something from his medicine pucha single eagle feather, its shaft adorned with intricate markings. This was given to me by Elder White Hawk when I became a man. It will speak for you when words fail. Eleanor accepted the feather with appropriate reverence. What does it say? That you walk under my protection, that you have suffered for water as we have, that your children's spirits deserve respect. They departed at midday, taking only what they could, carry water, dried meat, Richard's maps and documents, Eleanor's journal. Before leaving, Eleanor visited the graves one last time, placing cactus fruit on each small cairn. "I will return," she promised softly, "with help to protect you." The journey north was arduous. Eleanor's determination impressed Etu. Though unused to such travel, she matched his pace without complaint. They avoided the main trails, keeping to rocky terrain where their tracks would be difficult to follow. Each night, Etu taught Eleanor more of his language and the ways of moving quietly through the desert. On the third day, as they crossed a high mesa, Etu suddenly raised his hand in warning. Dropping to a crouch, he pointed to a distant ridge where dust rose in a telltale pattern. "Apache scouts," he whispered. "My band." Eleanor felt her heart race. "Will they welcome us?" "They will welcome me," Etu replied honestly. "You they will question. Stay close, speak only when addressed, and do not show fear." They continued forward, making no attempt at concealment. Soon, 3 riders appeared, approaching at speed. Etu stood tall, raising his empty hands in the Apache gesture of peaceful intent. The riders slowed, then circled them warily, expressions shifting from suspicion to recognition. "Etu Morning-Star," the lead scout called in Apache. "We believed your spirit had joined the ancestors." "The water carried me far, but not to the afterworld," Etu responded in the same language. "I seek counsel with Elder White Hawk." The scout's attention shifted to Eleanor, his face hardening. "You bring a white woman to our camp, the wife of a blue coat?" Etu stepped forward. "She walks under my protection. She brings knowledge that may save our waters." A tense silence followed as the scouts exchanged glances. Finally, the leader nodded curtly. "You will both be blindfolded. The location of our camp remains secret." As rough cloth was tied over her eyes, Eleanor felt Etu's reassuring touch on her arm. "Trust," he murmured in English, "as I trusted you." The journey to the Apache camp passed in darkness. Eleanor focused on maintaining her seat on the horse provided, relying on other senses to track their progress. The air grew cooler, suggesting higher elevation. The sounds of wind through pine needles replaced the desert's open silence. Actual running water burbled somewhere nearby. When the blindfold was removed, Eleanor blinked in the fading afternoon light. They had arrived at a hidden valley nestled between steep canyon walls. Lodges of animal hide and brush shelters formed a circle around a central fire pit. Women paused in their work to stare, children were hurriedly gathered behind protective adults, and warriors moved forward with hands near weapons. An elderly man emerged from the largest lodge, his deeply lined face registering first joy at seeing Etu, then concern as his gaze fell on Eleanor. His white hair was bound with a beaded leather band, and he carried a staff adorned with feathers and small bells that chimed softly as he approached. "Elder White Hawk," Etu said, bowing his head in respect. "I return from the Deadlands with news that concerns all who drink from Bitter Water Spring." The elder studied Eleanor with penetrating dark eyes. "You bring the enemy to our heart, Etu Morning-Star. Explain." Etu gestured to Eleanor. "Not enemy, ally. She has lost her children to the same thirst that threatens our young ones, and she brings proof of the Bluecoats' deception." White Hawk approached Eleanor, standing so close she could see the constellation of age spots across his weathered cheeks. "Why should we trust the words of a white woman?" he asked in halting English. Eleanor met White Hawk's penetrating gaze without flinching. Reaching slowly into her dress pocket, she withdrew her children's daguerreotype and held it out to him. "My children died because of the water diversion," she said simply. "I have no reason to love the policy that killed them." White Hawk studied the image, his expression unchanging. "Many white mothers have lost children. They do not seek justice for the Apache." "I seek justice for all children," Eleanor replied. "The water belongs to no one and everyone. My husband died trying to restore it. I'm finishing what he started." For several tense moments, White Hawk remained silent. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. "You will stay. The council will hear you when the moon rises." As darkness fell, Eleanor sat beside Etu near the communal fire. Though no one spoke directly to her, women brought them food, a stew of rabbit and wild herbs, with flat bread baked on hot stones. The tribe's wary acceptance was tenuous, but it was a beginning. "When you speak to the council," Etu advised quietly. Show strength but not aggression. They respect honesty above all. Before Eleanor could respond, a commotion arose at the camp's perimeter. A young scout raced into the clearing, speaking rapidly in Apache as he approached White Hawk. Though Eleanor couldn't understand the words, the urgency was unmistakable. Etu listened intently, his expression growing increasingly grim. When the scout finished his report, a heavy silence fell over the gathering. "What is it?" Eleanor whispered. "The surveyors," Etu translated. "They are already at the canyon. Tomorrow they will reach the place of your children's graves." Eleanor felt her breath catch, but the patrol said they wouldn't arrive for weeks. "They lied," Etu said simply. "The scout reports they have already placed marking stakes along the wash. They follow the path of least resistance directly through the arroyo where your cabin stands." White Hawk approached them, his face solemn in the firelight. "The iron road brings more than tracks," he said in English, clearly wanting Eleanor to understand. "It brings soldiers, settlers, death to our way of life. We have seen this to the east." "It also threatens Eleanor's children's resting place," Etu added. "Their graves will be destroyed." The elder studied Eleanor's face. Why should Apache warriors risk themselves for white children's graves? Eleanor stood, addressing not just White Hawk, but the entire gathering. "Because those graves mark where innocents suffered from the same injustice that harmed your people. Because the documents I have prove the water diversion was known to cause harm. Because the railroad will take more water, more land, more lives unless we act together." Her words were translated, rippling through the crowd. Murmurs of discussion followed, some angry, some thoughtful. "We must return immediately," Eleanor continued, turning to Etu. "If we can confront the surveyors, show them the graves, perhaps human decency will move them to adjust their route." Etu looked skeptical. White men's plans rarely bend for sentiment. "Then we need leverage," Eleanor insisted. "The maps, the documents, they prove wrongdoing. The army won't want that public." White Hawk raised his hand for silence. "The council will speak on this now, not when the moon rises. Too much depends on swift action." He gestured to the center of the circle. "Bring the white woman's evidence." Eleanor quickly retrieved Richard's portfolio from her pack. As she spread the maps and documents before the firelight, the tribal elders gathered close, listening as Etu translated the technical language into concepts they understood. The council's deliberation was brief but intense. Finally, White Hawk struck his staff against the ground, the small bells chiming with finality. "4 warriors will accompany you back to the graves," he announced. "They will help you speak to these surveyors. If words fail, they will ensure the sacred places are respected." Eleanor bowed her head in gratitude, but White Hawk wasn't finished. "If what you say proves false, if this is a trap," he added, his voice hardening, "your life answers for it." Within the hour, they were riding south again, pushing their mounts through the darkness. Alongside Etu and Eleanor rode 4 Apache warriors, faces painted for confrontation. They carried traditional weapons, but also rifles, modern tools for a modern threat. As dawn broke over the eastern mesas, they crested a ridge overlooking Eleanor's homestead. What they saw stopped them cold. A camp of surveyors had been established at the mouth of the arroyo. Men with instruments moved along the wash, driving tall wooden stakes into the ground at regular intervals. One stake had already been driven directly through the center of William's cairn, scattering the stones and cactus fruit into the dust. Eleanor's cry of anguish echoed across the canyon. Before Etu could stop her, she was spurring her horse down the slope, dust billowing behind her. The Apache warriors exchanged glances, hands moving to weapons, but Etu signaled them to hold. "Wait," he commanded. "Watch first. The surveyors are many." Eleanor reached the desecrated grave and dismounted in a fluid motion, dropping to her knees beside the scattered stones. With trembling hands, she began gathering them, rebuilding the cairn around the intrusive stake. The surveyors paused in their work, staring at the disheveled woman in her dust-covered dress. A tall man in a canvas coat approached her, clipboard in hand. "Ma'am, you can't be here. This is a designated railroad route under federal authority." Eleanor didn't look up, continuing to reconstruct the small monument. "This is my son's grave," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the morning stillness. "You've desecrated it." The surveyor faltered, glancing at his companions. "There's no record of a cemetery here. We have complete authorization." "William Ward," Eleanor interrupted, placing the last stone. 7 years old. Fever took him after the spring was diverted. This is his brother Thomas's grave, and his sister Sarah's beside it. My children. The name Ward caused a visible reaction among the survey team. The tall man looked more closely at Eleanor, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Eleanor? Eleanor Blackwood Ward?" She looked up, really seeing him for the first time. The surveyor removed his hat, revealing features that bore a striking resemblance to the man in her daguerreotype, the same straight nose, the same cleft chin. "Thomas," she whispered. "Thomas Ward? My God, it is you." He knelt beside her, surveyor's authority forgotten. "Richard's wife. We thought when we received no reply to our letters we assumed you'd returned east after Richard's death." "Letters?" Eleanor's confusion was evident. "I received no letters." From his vantage point on the ridge, Etu observed the unexpected reunion with growing concern. This man was clearly known to Eleanor, yet his presence complicated everything. He signaled the warriors to remain hidden but watchful. Thomas Ward helped Eleanor to her feet, keeping a supportive arm around her shoulders. "I'm Richard's brother. When news came of his death, my father and I wrote repeatedly. The army reported you had abandoned the homestead. We've been searching for over a year." Eleanor shook her head. "I never left, never received any communications." Her expression hardened as understanding dawned. "Hargrove, he must have intercepted everything." "Major Hargrove told us you'd suffered a breakdown after the children died," Thomas said. "That you'd become unstable, then disappeared. We feared the worst." "Hargrove wanted me gone because I have these," Eleanor said, drawing Richard's portfolio from her saddlebag. "Your brother's documentation of the water diversion's consequences. Evidence of Hargrove's disregard for both settler and Apache lives." Thomas examined the papers with growing dismay. "Richard sent me fragments of this information before his death. Letters hinting at corruption, at cover-ups. When he died so suddenly, I suspected foul play, but could prove nothing." "His death was no accident," Eleanor said flatly. "The flash flood that killed him was engineered. Hargrove ordered the destruction of a natural dam upstream to flush out Apache encampments." Thomas paled. "You have proof of this?" Eleanor withdrew a final document from the portfolio, a letter in Richard's handwriting that she had discovered hidden in the cabin's rafters only days earlier. She handed it to Thomas with reverence. "His last letter to you. Never sent. It details everything: the planned dam destruction, Hargrove's threats when Richard opposed it, his fear for his safety." As Thomas read, his hands began to shake. "This is a death warrant," he whispered. "Richard knew too much, threatened to expose too much." Etu, watching the exchange from a distance, made a decision. He signaled the warriors to remain vigilant, then rode down alone to join Eleanor. Thomas looked up sharply at Etu's approach, instinctively reaching for the pistol at his belt. "No," Eleanor said quickly. "He's with me. This is Etu Morning-Star. He saved my life and has been helping me protect the children's graves." Thomas stared in disbelief. "You're allied with an Apache?" "The same flood that killed Richard separated Etu from his people," Eleanor explained. "We both lost everything to Hargrove's actions." Thomas's gaze moved from Eleanor to Etu, then to the graves, and finally to the survey stakes cutting a line through the sacred ground. "The railroad can't be stopped," he said slowly, "but routes can be adjusted." He hesitated, then added, "and criminals can be brought to justice, even those in uniform." Etu studied the man carefully. "Words come easily, actions prove intent." "I agree," Thomas said, surprising them both. "Which is why I'm halting this survey immediately, and why you both must tell me everything you know about Major Hargrove." The Apache warriors emerged from hiding only after Etu signaled that the threat had diminished. Thomas Ward's composure faltered briefly at the sight of the armed men, but he held his ground as Eleanor made introductions. The warriors remained wary, their dark eyes assessing the surveyor and his team with justified suspicion. "Tell your men to pull up the stakes near the graves," Thomas instructed his assistant. "Mark a diversion on the map swell route a half-mile west, adding a slight curve to avoid this entire area." "Sir, that adds considerable cost," the assistant protested. "The company won't." "I'll bear the additional expense personally," Thomas interrupted. "Note it as a geological necessity." As the survey team reluctantly began removing the offending markers, Eleanor, Etu, and Thomas gathered in the shade of the cabin's porch. The portfolio of documents lay open between them on a rough wooden crate. "Hargrove has powerful allies," Thomas explained. "Army command trusts him. The territorial governor considers him essential to development plans. Your evidence alone won't be enough." "What about the testimony of those who suffered?" Eleanor asked. "Settlers who lost crops, Apache families displaced." Thomas shook his head. "Settlers fear military reprisal, and no court in the territory will accept Apache testimony." Etu, who had been silent, placed a hand on the map, showing the water diversion. "Words on paper mean nothing without power behind them. Hargrove has soldiers, guns. What do we have?" "Truth," Eleanor said firmly. "And unexpected allies," Thomas added, glancing toward the Apache warriors who maintained their vigilant watch. "Plus, the element of surprise. Hargrove believes Eleanor isolated and helpless. He thinks any Apache survivors are scattered and leaderless." "He also doesn't know about Richard's final letter," Eleanor pointed out, "or that his brother is now involved." As the day progressed, a plan began to take shape. Thomas would return to Fort Defiance, ostensibly to request military escort for his survey team due to Apache sightings. Once inside, he would contact Lieutenant Collins, a young officer who had expressed concerns about Hargrove's leadership to Richard before his death. "Collins lacks authority but has conscience," Thomas explained. Richard believed he could be trusted. Meanwhile, Etu would escort Eleanor back to the Apache camp, where they would gather warriors willing to create a diversion if needed. The threat of Apache attack would keep Hargrove's attention outward, away from the evidence being assembled against him. "We meet again in 3 days," Thomas concluded. "By then, I'll have assessed Collins' reliability and located any additional documentation in Richard's office if Hargrove hasn't destroyed it all." As sunset approached, the survey team departed, heading west away from the homestead. Thomas lingered, clearly reluctant to leave Eleanor. "I still can't believe you survived out here alone all this time," he said softly, "after everything you lost." "Not alone," Eleanor corrected, glancing at Etu, "and not without purpose." Thomas followed her gaze, studying the Apache tracker with new appreciation. "Richard would be grateful. He came to respect your people more than you might know." Etu acknowledged this with a slight nod. "A man who recognizes his mistakes walks a difficult but honorable path." Before departing, Thomas pressed something into Eleanor's hand, a small tin compass that had belonged to Richard. "He'd want you to have this," Thomas said, "to find your way." After Thomas's departure, Etu and Eleanor prepared for their return journey to the Apache camp. As Eleanor gathered essential supplies, Etu noticed her fingers lingering on items throughout the cabin, touching the children's small carved toys, tracing the height marks on the doorframe, running her hand across Richard's jacket, still hanging on a peg. "You are saying goodbye," he observed. Eleanor nodded. "Whether we succeed or fail, I can't return here. Not to stay. There are too many ghosts." As night fell, they set out northward, accompanied by 2 of the warriors, while the others remained to watch the graves. The journey seemed shorter this time, familiar terrain passing beneath steady hoofbeats. They traveled in companionable silence, each absorbed in thoughts of the confrontation to come. Upon reaching the Apache camp, they found White Hawk waiting, as if he had sensed their approach. The tribal medicine staff rested across his knees, a gnarled wooden rod adorned with eagle feathers, fox fur, and small copper bells. Its appearance at council meant matters of grave importance would be decided. "The Iron Road men," White Hawk said. "They respect the graves." "The Iron Road will change its path," Etu confirmed. "But a greater threat remains. The Bluecoat chief who stole the water, who caused the flood. We now have proof of his crimes." White Hawk's weathered face remained impassive. "Proof means nothing unless powerful ears hear it." He raised the medicine staff. "Tonight, we seek guidance from those who walked before us. Tomorrow, we decide who walks with you against this enemy." Dawn revealed a transformed Apache camp. Throughout the night, White Hawk had led the ceremony, calling upon ancestral wisdom as tribal members danced around the fire. Etu and Eleanor had participated, moving in the rhythmic steps that connected the living to their forebears. The medicine staff had passed from hand to hand, each holder voicing support or concern about confronting the fort's commander. When morning light filtered through the pine trees, 12 warriors had pledged themselves to the cause. White Hawk himself would remain behind, too old for battle but powerful in spirit sending. "The signs favor your path," he told Eleanor and Etu, "but victory requires sacrifice. Remember this when choices become difficult." Their plan required precise timing. A trader who regularly supplied Fort Defiance would carry a message to Thomas confirming their arrival near the fort at sunset the following day. The Apache warriors would position themselves on the ridges overlooking the fort, creating the impression of a much larger force through multiple campfires and shadow movement. While the soldiers' attention focused on the perceived threat, Eleanor would enter the fort disguised as a laundressa role that would grant her access to the officers' quarters without raising suspicion. Etu would remain with the warriors, coordinating their movements and prepared to intervene if Eleanor's cover was compromised. "This will test your courage," Etu told Eleanor as they made final preparations. "Entering the den of your enemy alone." Eleanor's hands were steady as she folded Richard's documents into a hidden pocket sewn into her petticoat. "I lived among them for years, the perfect invisible woman." Officers' wives and laundresses exist in different worlds, even standing side by side. They departed at midday, traveling cross-country to avoid cavalry patrols. The warriors moved like shadows through the landscape, appearing and disappearing among rocks and scrub brush, with such skill that even Etu, raised among them, sometimes lost sight of his companions. By dusk, they had reached the designated meeting point. A dry streamed within sight of Fort Defiance. No sign of Thomas or his contact appeared. As darkness fell, unease grew among the group. "He could have been discovered," one warrior suggested. "This could be a trap." Etu studied the fort through the gathering gloom. The bugle call for evening assembly echoed across the valley, followed by the precise movements of soldiers lowering the flag. Everything appeared normal, too normal. Something is wrong, he decided. The trader should have returned by now. Just as he prepared to send scouts for information, a solitary figure emerged from the brush. It was Lieutenant Collins, Thomas's contact within the fort. His uniform was disheveled, his face tense with urgency. "Ward sent me," he explained breathlessly. "He's been arrested. Hargrove somehow learned of your alliance. The Major is preparing a strike force to capture both of you." Eleanor's face paled. "How much does he know of our plan?" "Everything," Collins confirmed grimly. "There's a traitor among the surveyors. Hargrove knows about the Apache camp, the evidence you've gathered, all of it. He's declared Thomas a conspirator with hostiles and has him under guard." The Apache warriors melted into defensive positions, weapons readied. Etu turned to Collins, assessing the young officer's sincerity. "Why help us? You risk your career, your life." Collins' jaw tightened. "Because Captain Ward was right about the water diversion. I've watched children sicken in settler cabins, seen Hargrove ignore reports of contaminated wells. When I joined the army, I swore to protect innocent lives, not endanger them." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a brass cavalry bugle. "This is from Thomas. He says you'll understand." Eleanor took the instrument, confusion evident on her face until she noticed paper stuffed into its bell. Extracting the note, she read quickly, then passed it to Etu. "Thomas mapped the fort's guard rotations and identified where he's being held," she explained. "He believes the evidence we need is still in Richard's old trunk in the fort's records room." Etu studied the hastily sketched diagram. "This changes everything. We can no longer rely on distraction alone." "The guard changes at midnight," Collins added. "That's your best opportunity. I can get Eleanor inside as planned, but you'll need to move faster than anticipated." Eleanor squared her shoulders, determination replacing fear. "I'll need different clothing. Soldier's wife returning from visiting family would draw less attention than a laundress arriving at night." Collins nodded. "I brought my sister's dress. She's about your size." As Eleanor changed behind a screen of brush, Etu gathered the warriors to revise their strategy. No longer would they merely create a diversion. Now they would need to facilitate an escape as well. "Hargrove expects us to attack from the north," Etu explained, sketching in the dirt. "So we appear there first, just enough presence to draw attention without revealing our true numbers. Meanwhile, our main force approaches from the west, where the stockade wall is lowest." Eleanor emerged in the borrowed dress, her hair pinned severely beneath a plain bonnet. With her natural grace subdued into the weary posture of a traveler, she was transformed. "Remember," Collins cautioned as they prepared to move out, "Hargrove is desperate. He knows that if your evidence reaches the territorial governor, his career is finished. There's nothing more dangerous than a powerful man with everything to lose." Fort Defiance stood silhouetted against the night sky, its wooden palisade a jagged line breaking the sweep of stars. Lanterns marked the guard posts, their glow barely penetrating the darkness beyond the walls. The midnight hour approached as Eleanor, arm-linked with Lieutenant Collins, walked openly toward the main gate. Mrs. Simmons returning from Tucson, Collins called to the sentries, been visiting her sister's new baby. The guards barely glanced at Eleanor's downturned face, more interested in the lieutenant's flouting of curfew regulations. "Kind of you to escort the lady, sir," one commented with a knowing smirk. "The major won't like officers out after hours." "The major can discuss it with me at breakfast," Collins replied with calculated bravado. "Good night, gentlemen." Once inside, Collins directed Eleanor through the parade ground toward the officers' quarters. "Hargrove's light is still burning," he murmured, nodding toward a window glowing amber in the darkness. "He's anticipating your approach from the north. The records room is on the opposite side. We have perhaps 20 minutes before the guard change." Eleanor felt the weight of Richard's pistol hidden beneath her skirts, a cavalry officer's sidearm that Thomas had mentioned in his note. She had found it wrapped in oilcloth beneath a floorboard in the cabin, loaded and maintained, as if Richard had anticipated needing it in a hurry. "And Thomas?" she whispered. "Guardhouse, behind headquarters, 2 men watching, wait for the diversion before attempting contact." They separated at the corner of the hospital building, Collins continuing toward the barracks, while Eleanor slipped between shadows toward the administration building. The fort's layout was familiar. She had attended countless socials and official functions here during Richard's posting, but never had it felt so threatening. The records room window was unlatched, just as Collins had promised. Eleanor eased it open and climbed through, landing softly on the plank floor inside. Moonlight filtered through the glass, illuminating rows of filing cabinets and bookshelves. Richard's trunk should be against the back wall, among other officers' personal effects awaiting shipment to families. She found it beneath a stack of Cratisa, a brass-bound chest with Captain R. Ward stenciled on the side. The lock resisted briefly, then yielded to the key Collins had provided. Inside lay Richard's spare uniform, personal correspondence, and beneath these, a sealed oilskin packet labeled "Water Rights Documentation Official Misconduct." Eleanor's heart raced as she tucked the packet into her hidden pocket. Richard had prepared this evidence, anticipating a formal challenge to Hargrove's authority. Now, posthumously, he might succeed. A sudden commotion erupted out Sidgehouts from the northern perimeter, followed by the staccato report of rifle fire. The Apache diversion had begun right on schedule. Eleanor peered through the window to see soldiers rushing toward the disturbance, leaving the central compound momentarily deserted. This was her chance to reach Thomas. Slipping out through the window, she hurried toward the guardhouse, keeping to the building's shadow. The door was locked, but the adjacent window stood partially open for ventilation. Through it, she could see Thomas seated on a bench, hands bound before him. One guard remained inside, the other presumably drawn to the commotion. Eleanor retrieved Richard's pistol from its hiding place and tapped lightly on the window frame. Thomas looked up, eyes widening at the sight of her. The guard, hearing the noise, turned toward the window. "Who's there?" he called, reaching for his rifle. Eleanor stepped into view, pistol raised. "Open the door, private." Quietly. The young soldier froze, recognition dawning. "Mrs. Ward, you're supposed to be dead." "Quite disappointing, I'm sure. The key, please." As the private fumbled with the ring at his belt, a new sound cut through the night 3 short whistle blasts, the Apache signal for imminent danger. Something had gone wrong. Before Eleanor could react, the door behind her crashed open. Major Hargrove stood framed in the doorway, his own pistol already drawn. "Mrs. Ward," he said, voice cold with satisfaction, "how considerate of you to deliver yourself to justice, and with evidence of your treason, I expect." Hargrove's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. Eleanor armed, the guard paralyzed with indecision, Thomas attempting to rise despite his bonds. "You've been quite troublesome," Hargrove continued. "First your husband with his misplaced ethics, then you with your savage allies. Did you really think a few Apache could overcome a United States Army fort?" "They weren't meant to," Eleanor replied steadily, keeping her pistol trained on him. "Just to expose a corrupt officer who sacrificed innocent lives for his advancement." Hargrove's laugh held no humor. "Advancement? This is about survival, Mrs. Ward, the territory's survival. Sentimentality about water rights won't build a nation." A new eruption of gunfire, closer this time, punctuated his words. Hargrove's head turned slightly toward the sound, just enough distraction for Eleanor to lunge toward Thomas, thrusting Richard's key into his bound hands. Hargrove fired, the bullet splintering the wood beside Eleanor's head as she ducked. She returned fire, forcing the major back through the doorway as the guard dived for cover. Chaos erupted throughout the fort. The Apache warriors, responding to the gunshots from the guardhouse, intensified their diversionary attacks. Flaming arrows arced over the palisade walls, igniting hay bales and supply crates. Soldiers rushed in confused patterns, unsure which threat demanded priority. Thomas freed himself from his bonds and grabbed the guard's discarded rifle. "The water control station," he shouted to Eleanor over the din. "That's where we'll find proof of the dam's deliberate destruction. Hargrove keeps the blasting records there." Eleanor nodded, understanding instantly. The water control station stood a quarter-mile beyond the fort's eastern wall, a small stone structure housing the sluice gates and diversion mechanisms for the captured spring. If they could reach it, they could not only secure additional evidence, but potentially restore the water's natural flow. They slipped out the guardhouse's rear window as Hargrove shouted orders from the front courtyard. Gunfire peppered the night, but the darkness and confusion provided cover as they crept along the fort's periphery. "There," Thomas whispered, pointing to a shadow detaching itself from the eastern wall. "That's Etu." The Apache tracker moved silently toward them, bow in hand. "The warriors hold the northern and western approaches," he reported. "But soldiers gather at the eastern gate. They suspect our true purpose." "Hargrove knows we'll target the water station," Eleanor confirmed. "We need a new approach." Etu gestured toward the stables. "Underground. The water pipe runs beneath us." Thomas understood immediately. "The maintenance tunnel. Richard showed me once it runs from the fort to the control station, allowing access during hostile conditions." They moved cautiously toward the stables, avoiding the lantern light. Inside, the horses shifted nervously, sensing the tension in the air. Thomas located the trapdoor beneath a pile of hay and heaved it open, revealing a narrow passage barely tall enough for a man to navigate in a crouch. "I'll go first," he volunteered, disappearing into the darkness. Eleanor prepared to follow, but Etu caught her arm. "You have the documents?" She patted her hidden pocket. "Everything we've gathered. Richard's evidence, the diversion order, your people's testimonies. If we fail to return," Etu said solemnly, "my warriors will ensure these reach the territorial governor." A shared look communicated what words could not. Their mission now transcended personal vengeance. Lives on both sides depended on exposing Hargrove's corruption. The tunnel stretched nearly a half-mile, its close walls slick with condensation. They moved by feel, the only sound their breathing, and the occasional distant rumble of activity above. Finally, Thomas halted at a vertical ladder leading to another trapdoor. "The control station is directly above," he whispered. "Once we emerge, we'll have mere moments before we're discovered." Etu readied his knife. "I will secure the approach. You find the blasting records." Thomas pushed open the trapdoor cautiously. The control station was dimly lit by a single lantern, its interior dominated by the massive iron wheels and levers that regulated water flow. Filing cabinets lined one wall, presumably containing the operational records they sought. They climbed out, quickly scanning for guards. The station appeared empty, though shouting could be heard from the direction of the fort. Thomas immediately began searching the cabinets, while Eleanor examined the control mechanism itself. The main diversion is controlled by this wheel, she realized, recognizing the system from Richard's explanations. If we reverse it, we restore water to both the spring's natural course and the fort, Thomas confirmed, exactly as Richard proposed. Etu, watching through a narrow window, suddenly tensed. Hargrove comes, with soldiers. Thomas held up a leather portfolio triumphantly. Found it. Records of the dynamite requisition, the blast, plan everything, documenting the deliberate flood. Get those to safety, Eleanor commanded, moving toward the control wheel. I'll open the sluice gates. Before she could reach the mechanism, the door burst open. Major Hargrove stood in the entrance, uniform disheveled, eyes wild with fury. 2 soldiers flanked him, rifles raised. Step away from the controls, Hargrove ordered. This facility is under military protection. The only thing you're protecting is your career, Thomas countered, the incriminating documents clutched to his chest. Hargrove's expression darkened. The Apache have attacked a U.S. Army installation. That's an act of war. Your association with them is treason, punishable by hanging. Etu moved with lightning speed, knocking one soldier's rifle aside. Thomas tackled the second, sending both crashing into a bank of gauges. Eleanor lunged for the control wheel, throwing her weight against its rusted resistance. Hargrove drew his pistol, aiming at Eleanor. Stop, or I'll fire. Etu launched himself at the Major, their bodies colliding and sending the pistol skittering across the floor. They grappled fiercely, tumbling toward the open maintenance shaft. Eleanor continued straining against the wheel, feeling it gradually yield to her efforts. With a metallic groan, the mechanism finally turned. Water pressure gauges jumped as the flow redirected, restoring the spring's natural course while maintaining a controlled supply to the fort. Hargrove, seeing his authority literally flowing away, broke free from Etu with desperate strength. He lunged for his fallen pistol, raising it toward Eleanor with murderous intent. "You've destroyed everything," he shouted. Thomas threw himself between them as Hargrove fired. The bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him against the control panel. Eleanor screamed, dropping to her brother-in-law's side as blood spread across his shirt. Etu recovered instantly, tackling Hargrove again. Their struggle carried them dangerously close to the edge of the maintenance shaft. The Major, fighting with the desperation of a cornered animal, failed to notice his precarious position. "Your corruption ends now," Etu declared, finally pinning Hargrove against the shaft's opening. "This isn't over," Hargrove snarled, still struggling. "The army will hunt you all." His words cut off as the edge crumbled beneath his weight. With a startled cry, Hargrove toppled backward into the shaft, his fall punctuated by a sickening impact from below. Dawn painted the eastern sky with tentative strokes of pink and gold as an uneasy calm settled over Fort Defiance. Lieutenant Collins, acting as temporary commander following Hargrove's death, had negotiated a ceasefire with the Apache warriors. Both sides had suffered injuries, but, miraculously, no further fatalities beyond the Major himself. In the fort's infirmary, Thomas Ward lay pale but stable, his shoulder bandaged where Hargrove's bullet had struck him. Eleanor sat beside his cot, her own exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. "The cavalry escort from Tucson arrives today," Thomas informed her, his voice weak but determined. "Colonel Westfield is bringing the territorial inspector. They'll want statements from everyone." Eleanor nodded, patting the packet of documents secured in her pocket. "We have everything they need. Richard's records, Hargrove's blasting orders, testimonies from settlers affected by the water diversion." Outside the infirmary window, she could see Etu in conversation with Collins and several other officers. The Apache tracker moved with quiet dignity among the military men, his status transformed from enemy to reluctant ally in the space of a single night. By mid-morning, a plume of dust on the horizon announced the approaching cavalry detachment. Colonel Westfield, a stern-faced veteran with iron-gray hair and impeccable posture, wasted no time establishing an investigative council in the fort's headquarters building. Eleanor, Thomas, Etu, and representatives from both the military and the Apache tribe were summoned to present their accounts. The territorial inspector, a civilian official named Ambrose, recorded each testimony with meticulous attention to detail. "This is a most irregular situation," Colonel Westfield observed after hours of statements. "A military officer dead, an Apache alliance, accusations of corruption reaching to the highest levels of territorial command. Yet the evidence is irrefutable," Ambrose countered, gesturing to the documents spread across the table. "Captain Ward's detailed records show a pattern of disregard for civilian water rights. Major Hargrove's orders explicitly authorized destruction of the natural dam, despite knowing it would endanger both settler and Apache communities." Westfield's gaze moved from Eleanor to Etu. "The question remains, what is to be done now? The fort requires water. The railroad survey must proceed. Yet there are clearly competing interests at stake." Eleanor stood, unfolding a map Thomas had prepared during his recovery. "My husband believed there was a solution that would serve all parties," she said, pointing to the diagram. "A shared water management system, drawing from the spring's abundant flow without depleting it. The technology exists. What has been lacking is the will." Ambrose studied the proposal with interest. "A joint water treaty between the military, settlers, and Apache bands?" "Unprecedented," Westfield muttered, though his tone suggested intrigue rather than dismissal. "As is this entire situation," Thomas added from his seat, where he sat propped up by pillows. "Perhaps unprecedented problems require unprecedented solutions." The negotiations continued for 3 days. Apache representatives, initially skeptical, gradually engaged as it became clear that Eleanor and Thomas genuinely sought equitable terms. Military engineers confirmed that Richard's water-sharing design was sound, requiring only modest modifications to the existing infrastructure. On the 4th day, the joint water treaty was signed in a ceremony attended by all parties. The document, written in both English and Apache, established protected access to the spring for native tribes, settlers, and military operations alike. A commission comprising representatives from each group would oversee its implementation and resolve disputes. "Your husband would be proud," Colonel Westfield told Eleanor privately after the signing. "Few men have the vision to see beyond immediate advantage to lasting peace." As the military contingent prepared to depart, Ambrose approached Eleanor with news about the railroad survey. "The route has been officially modified," he confirmed. "The children's burial site will remain undisturbed, protected as a historical landmark." Eleanor felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a burden she had carried so long it had become part of her. She sought out Etu, finding him near the eastern gate, gazing toward the distant mountains where his tribe awaited news. "It is done," she told him simply. "The water flows for all. The graves remain sacred." Etu nodded, a rare smile softening his features. "Not an ending," he observed, "a beginning." Eleanor followed his gaze to where the restored spring now flowed freely down its natural course, while also supplying the fort through a regulated channel. Already, green shoots were emerging along the waterway, life returning to soil long parched. "Richard believed water belonged to no one and everyone," she said softly, "that its nature is to nourish without discrimination." "A wise man," Etu acknowledged, "though it took great loss for him to find this wisdom." Eleanor touched the daguerreotype in her pocket, the faces of her children forever preserved in their moment of innocence. "Some lessons come at unbearable cost," she agreed. "The question is whether we learn from them." 1 week after the treaty signing, Eleanor returned to the children's burial site. The surveyors' stakes had been removed, leaving no trace of the railroad's intended path. Instead, smooth stones marked a new trail leading from the wash to the small alcove where the 3 cairns stood restored to their original dignity. To her surprise, Etu was already there, kneeling beside William's grave. Small desert plants surrounded the base of each cairn, carefully transplanted specimens that Eleanor recognized as medicinal herbs used by the Apache. "Your people helped with this?" she asked, touching a fragrant sage plant that would eventually spread its silvery foliage across the rocky ground. Etu nodded. White Hawk sent them. He said children's resting places should nurture life. He gestured to the various plantings. These will flower in different seasons, bringing color throughout the year, and they require little water to thrive. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Eleanor deeply. These plants represented more than mere decoration. They symbolized the Apache's acknowledgement of her loss and their respect for her children's memory. "I've been thinking," she said, settling beside him on a flat rock. "This place deserves to be more than just graves. It could become a garden, a place of beauty and remembrance." Etu considered this. "Among my people, we do not linger at death sites. But I have seen how your tending of these graves has helped your spirit heal." "Not just for me," Eleanor explained. "For anyone who has lost someone to the water conflicts. Apache children, settler children, all victims of the same struggle." She gestured to the horizon. With the spring restored, plants could flourish here, a living memorial. Over the following days, word of the memorial garden spread. Families from nearby homesteads arrived, bringing cuttings from their own garden, shardy rose bushes, native wildflowers, desert-adapted fruit trees. To Eleanor's astonishment, Apache women also came, bearing seed bundles and knowledge of which plants would attract butterflies and hummingbirds. Together, they transformed the alcove into a sheltered garden, unlike anything the territory had seen. Stone pathways wound between plantings, arranged to catch the limited rainfall. A simple irrigation channel, designed by Thomas using principles from Richard's water-sharing system, brought a small, sustainable flow from the restored spring. At the center, the three cairns remained, now surrounded by concentric circles of vegetation that would bloom in waves throughout the seasons. Eleanor incorporated Apache symbols of healing and protection into the design, while the settlers contributed traditional memorial plantings from their eastern homelands. On the day the garden was completed, a small ceremony brought together people from all communities. White Hawk himself made the journey, his ancient face reflecting both sorrow for past conflicts and hope for the changed relationship between their peoples. "The Apache have a saying," he told those gathered, speaking through Etu's translation. "When a child dies, a star is born." Now these star children have a place where both Apache and white people can look up together. Eleanor had worried that this moment might reopen her grief, making the loss fresh again. Instead, she felt an unexpected peace. The children's memory remained, but it was now woven into something larger, a bridge between cultures, a testament to the possibility of healing even after devastating loss. As evening approached and the visitors departed, Eleanor remained in the garden with Etu. They sat in companionable silence, watching the sunset paint the desert in fiery hues of orange and crimson. "What will you do now?" Etu asked finally. "Return to your eastern family?" Eleanor considered the question. Thomas had offered exactly that passage to Boston, where her parents still lived, unaware of their grandchildren's fate. The comfortable life she had abandoned to follow Richard west could, perhaps, be reclaimed. "No," she said with quiet certainty. "My work is here. The water treaty will need advocates. The garden will need tending." She paused, glancing at Etu. "And I've discovered strength in myself I never knew existed. I can't return to being the person I was." Etu nodded, understanding in his eyes. The flood changes the landscape. What emerges is not the same as what was before. As darkness settled over the desert, the first stars appeared above them. Eleanor imagined William, Sarah, and Thomas among them, their spirits free in the vast expanse of sky. The garden would remain as their earthly anchor, not a place of mourning, but a testament to the beauty that could grow from even the most barren ground. "Tomorrow," she said, "I'll bring cactus fruit to plant along the eastern edge. They'll take years to mature, but their flowers will be magnificent." "I will help," Etu replied simply. "Some journeys are better walked together." 1 year later, the Arizona Territory shimmered in the heat of another summer. The railroad had come, but its tracks curved respectfully around the memorial garden, which had flourished beyond anyone's expectations. Desert wildflowers carpeted the ground between carefully tended plantings, their colors defying the harshness of the environment. Eleanor no longer lived in the small cabin by the graves. She had established a new home at the midpoint between Fort Defiance and the Apache settlementa, unique dwelling that combined the practical construction methods of Eastern settlers with the environmental wisdom of the Apache. The walls were thick adobe, keeping the interior cool even in the fiercest heat. The roof incorporated both shingled sections and traditional brush-covered areas that allowed for cooking smoke to escape while providing shade for an outdoor working area. Inside, Eleanor's few remaining possessions from her life with Richard shared space with handcrafted Apache items baskets, pottery, and woven textiles. Books lined simple shelves, including several journals where she meticulously documented both settler and Apache knowledge of the region's plants, wildlife, and seasonal patterns. The Water Commission, established under the treaty, met monthly at her home, its neutral location symbolic of its purpose. Eleanor served as record keeper and mediator, her measured judgment respected by all parties. Issues that would once have led to violence were now resolved through negotiation, with the shared commitment to water stewardship providing common ground. Etu visited frequently, dividing his time between his duties as chief scout for his band and his role as the Apache representative to the Commission. His tracking skills, once used primarily for hunting and warfare, now served to monitor the watershed and wildlife movements throughout the territory. Under his guidance, both settler and military hunting practices had been modified to preserve game populations. On this particular morning, Eleanor awaited his arrival with special anticipation. Together, they had planned a small ceremony to mark the anniversary of the Water Treaty. Representatives from all communities would gather at the memorial garden, where the first generation of cactus they had planted was about to bloom. She heard his approach before seeing him the soft jingle of silver conchos on leather, a sound she had come to associate with friendship and safety. Stepping outside, she smiled at the sight of Etu leading his pony up the gentle slope to her home. Behind him followed White Hawk, moving slowly but with determined dignity despite his advanced age. "The elders have decided to attend," Etu explained as he helped White Hawk dismount. "They feel this day marks an important turning in our shared history." Eleanor welcomed them with the traditional Apache greeting she had learned, her pronunciation earning an approving nod from White Hawk. Inside, she served cool water from pottery vessels, specifically designed to keep liquids chilled in the desert heat. "The garden has become known even beyond the territory," she told them, pouring for White Hawk first as respect demanded. A botanist from the Smithsonian visited last month to document the desert adaptations. He was particularly interested in how we've combined traditional knowledge from both our peoples. White Hawk sipped his water thoughtfully. "When enemies become teachers to each other, the world changes its shape." As they prepared to depart for the ceremony, Eleanor retrieved a special item she had been working on for months, a woven basket containing soil from the children's graves, mixed with earth from Apache sacred sites. Small objects representing both cultures nestled in this symbolic mixture: a silver button from Richard's uniform, a polished stone from the spring source, a tiny wooden horse William had played with, an eagle feather gifted by White Hawk. "For the center of the garden," she explained, "where all paths meet." The journey to the memorial site took them past the restored spring, now flowing with regulated abundance that supported all communities. Cottonwood saplings lined the watercourse, their roots stabilizing the banks while their leaves provided precious shade. Cattle from settler ranches and horses from the Apache band drank side by side from designated watering areas designed to prevent overuse. At the garden, others had already gathered. Thomas, now recovered and serving as liaison between the railroad company and local communities, Lieutenant Collins, whose stand against corruption had earned him promotion, families from homesteads and tribal bands alike, their children playing together among the flowering paths. Eleanor watched as Etu carried the ceremonial basket to the garden's center. 1 year ago, such cooperation would have seemed impossible, the wounds between their peoples too deep, the injustices too raw for healing. Yet here they stood, not with all problems solved, but with a framework for addressing conflicts without bloodshed. As White Hawk blessed the basket and its placement, Eleanor caught Etu's eye across the gathering. His slight nod conveyed what words could note: acknowledgement of how far they had come. and recognition of how much work still lay ahead. Their shared journey had only just begun. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the memorial garden, the anniversary ceremony concluded. Families dispersed gradually, lingering to admire the rare cactus blooms that had opened for the occasion, delicate pink flowers emerging from fierce thorns, a testament to beauty born from adversity. Eleanor and Etu remained, sitting on a stone bench positioned to catch the last warmth of the day. Between them rested a woven basket, newly completed by Eleanor under the guidance of an Apache weaver. Its intricate pattern told the story of their journey, the flood that separated and ultimately connected them, the graves that became a garden, the conflict transformed into cooperation. "I still dream of them," Eleanor confessed, watching a hummingbird dart among the sage blossoms. "William, Sarah, Thomas. In my dreams they're playing by the spring as it flows now, free and clean." Etu nodded. "The ancestors walk in dreams. My sister's sons visit me this way as well." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind possible only between those who have witnessed each other's deepest grief and highest courage. The journey from enemies to allies to friends had not been simple or direct, but its very complexity gave it strength, like the twisted branches of a desert mesquite that bend without breaking in the strongest winds. "When I first saw you watching me gather cactus fruit," Eleanor said, "I thought you might kill me. I didn't care if you did." "And I thought you were simply a white settler stealing from the land," Etu replied. "I could not see past what I expected to find." "We were both right, in ways," Eleanor observed, "and completely wrong in others. I was a settler benefiting from stolen land and water. You were an enemy with every reason to hate what my husband represented." "Yet here we sit," Etu said, gesturing to the garden around them, "planning next season's plantings." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a young Apache boy, perhaps 9 years old, leading his even younger sister by the hand. They approached shyly, the girl clutching a small bouquet of wildflowers. "For the children who sleep here," the boy explained in careful English, encouraging his sister to place the flowers on one of the cairns. Eleanor smiled her thanks, recognizing them as White Hawk's grandchildren. The tribal elder had made a point of teaching the youngest generation about the garden's significance, ensuring the hard-won peace would outlive its architects. After the children departed, Etu retrieved something from his medicine, pucha, small leather-bound book. "Thomas brought this from the east," he explained, handing it to Eleanor, "a botanist's guide to desert plants. He thought it might help with the garden's expansion." Eleanor accepted the gift, touched by the continuing evidence of how their separate worlds had begun to interweave. Thomas, once horrified by her alliance with the Apache, now regularly exchanged knowledge and resources with Etu. Lieutenant Collins had established educational exchanges between fort children and tribal youth. The territorial governor had cited their water treaty as a model for other regions. "Sometimes I wonder what Richard would think of all this," Eleanor mused, watching the sunset paint the canyon walls in fiery gold. "He died still believing in military solutions, in progress through control." "Perhaps not," Etu countered gently. "His last actions were to seek alternative water sources, to document the harm done by diversion. Seeds of change were growing in him." Eleanor considered this perspective. "I'd like to believe that's true, that he was finding his way to a better understanding, as we all have been forced to do." As darkness settled over the desert, they gathered their belongings to depart. Stars emerged in the vast expanse above them, including the 3 brightest that Eleanor had come to associate with her children. The night air carried the mingled scents of sage, juniper, and the sweet fragrance of cactus flowers that opened only after sunset. At the garden's entrance, they paused for a final look. What had begun as 3 crude stone cairns monuments to loss and injustice had transformed into a living testament to resilience and renewal. The cactus fruit that once represented Eleanor's solitary grief now symbolized shared nourishment and growth. "Water finds its true path," Etu said, echoing words spoken long ago when their journey together was just beginning. "And sometimes," Eleanor added, "so do people." They walked together down the path that connected the garden to the wider world, their shadows merging in the moonlight, 2 figures from different worlds, moving forward in step, carrying the lessons of the past toward a future neither could have imagined alone.